It's a rainy afternoon here in Northwest Arkansas, and so I thought I'd take some time while it's overcast to give you a quick update of what's going on in the garden here in the mid to late July. On the far left of this garden space is a forsythia bush that I use for cutting greens. I don't necessarily need for it to bloom, but I like to use the greenery in arrangements. Next up is some dill that's self-seeded. Last summer I planted dill all throughout my garden in this space in the summer, and I didn't know that dill likes colder temperatures to germinate, so the seeds saved over themselves and went ahead and sprouted this year. Imagine my surprise when this whole bed is filled with dill, but I really like to use it for cutting, and I find it's a little polleny at this stage when you can see the yellow pollen, but then also it's a little better when it has gone to seed or right before it's super polleny. Sorry, one of our garden dogs is helping us today. You'll also notice if I zoom in on my dill that I have, a bunch of these caterpillars that I thought were monarchs, but they're actually the black swallowtails. So I'm super excited for these to go into chrysalis and to make butterflies. Now you might think, well, they're eating all of your dill, and I have a lot of dill, so it's okay with me. I'm okay with letting some of our pollinators take up some of my crop. Next up, next to my dill are my dahlias, and I am trying to use these mesh bags to keep away pests so that these blooms will be cuttable for me. So when the blooms are about this stage, before they've started opening, I'm just going ahead and covering them with the bags so that I can keep all the pests away from them. I don't spray anything in my garden, and I find I just hand pick Japanese beetles and things like that, but larger Japanese beetles, worms, caterpillars, that kind of thing, I can keep away using these mesh bags. Next up, I have a blueberry bush that will take up this whole area. It will be about 5 feet tall and 3 to 5 feet across. For now, it's slow growing. These are some celosia that self-seeded themselves from last year. I had a group of them here, and I have a couple, you can see one here and then a couple here, that reseeded themselves, as well as this coneflower. This one here and these in here are all self-seeded from last year. I took away the mother coneflower plant because I wanted coneflowers only in my front garden, and a bunch of babies came up on their own where seed had been dropped. The last major thing in this space is my figs. These are Chicago hardy figs. They die back to the ground in our area in the winter, in the cold, but they grow back up from the root every single year. So this was completely down at the ground when our spring started, and it's probably already 4.5, almost 5 feet tall, and pretty far across. I'd say at least 5 feet across as well. This is 2 hardy figs that I planted in the same hole because I wanted it to be kind of a double trunk situation, and it really just looks like a giant bush, but I like the look of this fig by our back door. At this point in the season, I've already cut back my reblooming perennials, catmint being one of them, and you can see that it's starting to reflush with blooms. My purple smoke bush is looking so much better. Last year it had one long branch or stem that was about almost 9 feet tall, and then there was nothing else happening, so I cut it back all the way to the ground, and it is looking really, really nice now. It has cuttable stems that are nice and long I can use in arrangements, or just let it look like a nice shrub in my garden space. My purple coneflowers are not really purple. This is a variety that is more pink, but they have self-seeded themselves, so I'm hoping that they'll take up this whole area, and they're looking so nice, and I love how they match the pink of my miniature roses. This, I believe it's Happy Days calendula mix that I got from Baker Creek. I cut back and it is reblooming. I like to use calendula in salves and things like that, so I save the leaves, or the petals, I'm sorry, when they are dry. Because it's been raining, this is not an ideal time to do this, but when you see that your blossoms, the petals are drying up, you can pull them off and dry them. So I like to just make sure that they're nice and dry. It's a nice hot day when I harvest these petals, and then I'll keep them inside with lots of airflow so that they save for me. When I make salve, I put them in some type of oil, and you can either put it on your windowsill or you can heat it up to infuse the oil for your salve. I'm kind of surprised I haven't seen a lot of caterpillars on my milkweed. This is what monarch butterflies really like. I've seen monarchs in the area, but I have not seen a ton of caterpillar activity on these milkweed, but they are native in our area and they're doing really well this year. Last year they seemed a little bit more weak and they struggled with pest pressure more, especially aphids, but this year they're doing really awesome. My sedum is starting to flower, and I really like this just for greens, but I like the flowers as well, and they hold really nicely if you want to use them dried. Sedum is one that lasts a super long time in the vase, and it will even start rooting in water if you let it leave it long enough. Next up are these rudbeckia, or black-eyed Susans, and I just took a couple of really small rooted cuttings from my grandma's house. She dug up some roots for me, and they are looking so incredible this year. Imagine just 5 little bitty plants and they make this huge mass of color. If you look in the back here, you see my hollyhock seedlings that I planted this spring. I transferred them out earlier in the summer, and they were only a couple of inches tall, but they look so great. And I'm almost wondering if we have enough time left in the season for them to bloom for me this year. I'll keep you guys posted. My yarrow is doing awesome. I find I cut this enough for arrangements that I don't need to cut it back all together, but you could, if you let it bloom out completely, cut off any of the spent blooms, kind of like these, where you can see more of the pollen centers in the middle. You can cut those all the way back, give them a good shear, and they will rebloom for you. This echinopsis is new to me. I grew it from seed this year, or last year maybe. I got it in the ground a little bit late, so it was a little bitty this year, early spring, and then it is blooming. It's looking really nice. If you're using it for arrangements or for the vase, I think you're supposed to harvest it at this stage before it has pollen showing, but I'm just letting it go to the bees, and I think I will just cut it back and see if it'll rebloom for me. Our native 9-bark is doing awesome in the back as well. It has put on a ton of growth already, and I love the kind of bright green foliage. This is my second season with these dwarf red twig dogwoods, and the leaves are beautiful and they take up a ton of space in my garden that I really like the fullness of them, but you can see that they're just completely pest ridden and struggling. They had this kind of browning already earlier in the season, and now they're covered in these caterpillars that look kind of like bird poop, but they just completely annihilate these bushes. I have 3 of them. It's a big portion of my front garden that is not looking nice, and then they also get bagworms on them later in the season. So I think my plan will be to take these out and try to find something else that works better in this area. My goal, like I said, I don't spray, I don't do any of that. So my goal is to find something that is naturally more resistant in our area, and possibly to bring in more native things into my garden space. We'll see what I do. This is a purple salvia that I started from seed this spring, and it's already blooming. I'm super excited for it to take over this space, and I think I'll go ahead and try to sow more of those seeds so that I can have extras as well. I envision kind of taking up this whole area right here with this lighter purple salvia, and then when you look down the way, there is more purple salvia that's a deeper color further down. So I want to repeat that same kind of spike interest. My Rose of Sharon fell down in our storms when we had tornadoes in the area, and you can see that all of the blooms are facing the back wall. This is because she was laying down completely right here, so all of the blooms pointed up toward the sun. So it's going to take a while for the blooms to start pointing the correct direction, but it looks so much better now staked up. There's much more space here for my bee balm and everything to breathe, so it was worth staking it back up. It was covering up a peony that you can barely see there, but it's going to take a while for that to rebound. I really like this view right here with my purple salvia and my great grandma's phlox, and then also this other sedum that is already also starting to flower. I really like to use sedum at this stage in arrangements because of the kind of sparkle and whimsy that they add. Even before they bloom, they give a lot of great texture. And again, like with the other sedum, these will last an incredibly long time in the vase and even root in water if they're left long enough. I just love this color combination of the kind of minty blue-green of the sedum and the purple of the Weigelia bushes. I also planted this sage from seed this year and it's doing really well. And then over here, I have some oregano that I planted from seed this year as well. There's 3 of them. And as I learn more about oregano, I'm wondering if this is gonna actually get really tall, but that's okay. I'll use it for cutting foliage. But I'm not quite sure if the front of my flower bed is the ideal place for it, but I'll keep you guys posted on that. You can see that my daylilies are starting to rebloom, and I have my very first aster blooms. These are really short and don't do a ton for a long time, and then beginning of July they start to spring up and they end up getting quite tall, and soon they will be just completely covered in these bluish purple, if I can, there we go, bluish purple blooms. So I am so excited to see these in full bloom. It will not be long before they are just amazing. At this point in the season, this viburnum still has some berries on it. I'll get in close so you can see those. And it's also putting on some new growth, so that is pretty exciting. See those berries in there? My hostas are looking good on this left side of our porch. This viburnum over here that matches the other one is also looking nice and putting on some growth. In here was my first attempt of cool flowers, and I did not do a great job of getting them transplanted out in time because we were really struggling with wind and storms, and it was difficult for me to harden off my seedlings without just completely annihilating them. So I have a couple of Love in a Mist. You can see the pods. I have a couple of Bupleurum. Next year I'm going to try to sow those in the fall, or this year I guess. Soon I'll start sowing seeds for those so that they'll be ready. I do have a couple of Floret Celosia that I have in here. You can see this is my hardening off space. It does get quite a bit of wind, but I'm working on hardening off some more sage and oregano to put in the front of my bed over there. The columbine is still holding on to her pods. I don't know how. And my hydrangeas are becoming the star of the show over on this east side of our house. I hope this gives you an idea of what's blooming in my garden this time of year, and maybe some blooms that you could incorporate into your garden so that you have beautiful July blooms as well. Thank you so much for joining me and growing with me.